Yo, what's going on, guys? Hope everybody's having a great day today. In today's video, I figured I'd do something different. I wanted to show you guys actually a coding example instead of like giving you like bullet points on like how to solve this problem versus this issue, and kind of give you a hands-on demo of something that we call magic numbers in code. Depending on where you work at or the projects that you're already working on, you might run into magic numbers. And basically what a magic number is that it's just a number that has zero context. You don't know what it is, what it means. It's just in the code. If this equals to 1, do something. If not, do something else. And it really is confusing when you're looking at something like that and you're trying to figure out, okay, so what if I change that value from a 1 to a 2? What happens? So let me just explain what the project is and what we're going to be doing to solve this problem. So right here, I have a React in Vite setup with TypeScript. You could configure it with that. And it's very powerful. I love it. And this is the standard for today. For those of you that don't know, I work on React applications, full stack engineer, front end, back end. I'm good with Python, Node, and other backend languages like MySQL and all that stuff. In this example, we're just going to do everything purely on the front end, and I'm going to show you guys, in a real world example, why having magic numbers in your code is bad and what could happen if you don't solve this relatively quickly or bring this to someone's attention. Okay, so let's walk through the project real quick, and then from there, we'll discuss how we can solve these magic numbers and why it's important to use TypeScript around that. So this is the project. Basically, with these statuses, you have different badges. So it generates a badge and a color scheme for it, right? So this is handy whenever you're building an application and you wanted to show a different status for an account, or just in general with telling the user what's going on and what action needs to be taken. This will be good for like a UI documentation purposes, like, hey, this is the standard for how we set badges and all that stuff, and this is how it should look. But as you can see, as I'm clicking through the statuses, the color changes, the title of that status changes, and you get to see exactly what that status is, right? Now, going back to our project, this is the mock data for it. Now, typically you will create an API to pull in this data from the back end, and it will come into this format like this. And you would have to, as a developer, understand like, okay, when I call this API, these are the statuses. And as you can see, status of 1 is active, 2 suspended, 3 deleted, and 4 pending, right? Very simple. But this gets complex the more statuses that you add. And if this is being used in multiple places in the app and you don't have any like type safety around it or any definition around those numbers, it could get quite hairy. So, as you can see, this is what generates the front end from the example I just showed you. And then we have this status badge component. Now, this is the meat and potatoes of everything. As you can see, these magic numbers lives in someone's head. Someone wrote this component and they figured, okay, when the status is 0, it's pending, right? But if we look back, which is our first bug, when we look back, pending is 4. So this opens your application to bugs to where you have to refactor things or change things on the back end, which is something that you don't want to do. And you need to maintain that on the front end somehow. So this is an issue. Then you can see that we have an itinerary function, which is basically a shorthand if statement. So you don't have the if else blocks and all that stuff. Some people like this format. Other people like to do if else blocks or case statements, whichever you prefer, as long as the code is readable and you can understand what's going on. That's the most important thing. So as you can see, these 0, 1, 2, 3 is just magic numbers. What does it mean? Yes, I see that it means pending, active, and suspended, but you need to have a definition around that. So that's something that we're going to solve today. Same thing here. Based on that status, we should have a color, right? So like if I go back to the UI example, that's how we're generating that. And you could easily make a mistake based on the code itself. So if that's the case, we have to fix this problem, okay? Because this could be what you would consider tech debt. So, and it's not going to be good, especially if you have multiple components pulling in that status. You now have to trace back, okay, what is the status of one, and then go back and make sure that you're understanding what that status is. As a new developer coming into the code base, this is an issue because they could easily make a mistake and it could cause a lot of problems. FYI. All right. So in this case, you want to make things easier to read and define what they are. Okay. So how do we solve this problem? Like, how do we get rid of these magic numbers? In TypeScript, there's a type called enumeration. So basically, or enum. So when you create an enum type, you could define what those numbers are. And I'm going to show you guys how to create that. So as you can see in my directory, I have a shared folder and I also have an API folder. So if you have an API folder, that just means that any backend services that I have, like calling endpoints and all that stuff, will be in this folder. But in this case, I'm going to create a new folder called enums. And in this folder, I'm going to create a new file called status.tsx. So in this file, to set up an enum type, the first, and if you want to use it within your application, the first thing that you need to do is type in export. Then you would do enum and status, right? And here's the kicker here. So you see that it auto-generated what the code should be. This is AI doing all this stuff, by the way. So I would highly suggest that you guys get handy with the AI, get comfortable with it, because it's going to save a lot of time and work. Because imagine like typing all this stuff in by yourself. Okay. It's going to take a long time, especially before AI. You have to manually go in here and type this whole definition out. So I would do like pending, like for example, pending equals to 0. Then, well, actually, it shouldn't be 0. It should be 4. And I'm going to move things around because I like things in order. So do like active equals to 1, right? And suspended, all that stuff. It took care of it for me. I don't have to really type any of this stuff out. And I need to close this out. So now I have my enum type already set up here, right? Perfect. Now that we have this enum type defined in our code, all we need to do now, say like for this bug, status equals to 0, right? All I got to do is do status dot pending. Solves it. And then if I hover into this, and actually, it looks like there's a bug with, let me remove this. And then I'm just going to define it. So I'm going to do status, enum, boom. And now we're cooking. Now we're cooking. So now pending. Perfect. If I do the same thing again, active. And then we're just going to go down the line, right? And work through this. But this saves a lot of time. Now I know the definition of what that number is without guessing, and there's no confusion. So now I know that pending is tied to 4 based on the enum. And if there's any changes within the status itself, like based on the number, usually when you're dealing with pulling that data from the back end, you're using a database, it should be the primary key of that database table. So the number shouldn't change. It should be auto enumerated. All right. If for any reason that number changes, you can easily change it on the front end and you should be fine. But if it changes on the back end and then the front end is obviously, if it's a production thing, you have to create a hotfix and fix it. But honestly, you shouldn't even have to worry about those numbers. Those numbers should stay static. Right. So as I'm hovering over this, you can see these are the numbers. Great. Now we could apply this to other areas, right? And then I'll show you what the finished product is in our app. So as I'm doing this, I am defining what these statuses are based on the data that comes back from the back end. And Now we have something that's relatively clean. There's no magic numbers in here anymore, right? Like we're good. We're solid. Now, if I switch back to our app, if I click on pending now, it's gray. And if we go back to the code itself, you can see that pending is gray. There's no issues now, right? So this is where enum types come in handy. You have to define that in your code. If you don't, you're going to have a lot of trouble trying to figure out what's going on in your code and what status links to what, and you're prone to bugs, like I said. All right. So this is an easy way to deal with this problem. Now, I'm not a big fan of this. And the reason why I'm not a big fan of this is because it's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. So depending on your preference, and I'm going to show you the way I would do it just to kind of clean things up. And we could simplify this in different steps. So I'm a different step type of guy. You know what I'm saying? So this is cool for the time being, but as you start to add more statuses, let's just add another status. Let's add another status. So here, let's see what AI comes up with. Unknown. Or we could do in, well, we already got pending. We could do in review. Okay. So now we have a new status of in review. And if I go back to my app, you see in review, and now it shows unknown, right? This is not correct. So we obviously need to make a change in our code to support that. So when we go back to badge status, then I'm going to create another itinerary, right? And I'm going to change this also. This is where it gets complicated, right? It forces the developer to make sure that they are honest in, you need to define that enum type if there's a new status. You just have to do that. If you don't, then you're dealing with just adding that status equals to 5, and now we're back to square one. So because we have this new status, all I need to do here is now click on in review, and then this would be, that would take care of that. And then here, I'm just going to do status in review. So now I'm going to do this, and we got a blue, right? So if I go back now to our app, we should see in reviews blue now. And it should be unknown, right? So we define that. Now, if there's any other status, obviously this was working because the default value was unknown because we didn't have that defined in our enum, and also that status wasn't like a definition that was in that enum type at all. So once we added it, now we have a clear definition of what it is, what the color is, what the name is, and it shows up in our app. So you want something like this, right? Like you don't want to leave things unanswered. Make sure that based on the requirements that you do get, that you're defining whatever needs to be defined. All right. So this is good. This is clean. The only problem that I have, though, I mean, functionality wise, this is fine. The problem that I have with this is that this could get relatively long, as you can see. Why would you want to do that, right? So what I would do is do like a const, and I would say label text or something like that, create a function. And here, what we're going to do is take this. So we'll take the status, right? So our status here is a number, and they call it bad props, but honestly, for this example, it should be status badge props. And because I changed that, I need to make sure that this is defined here. And just to be clear, so whenever you're passing in properties to a component in React, at least when you're using TypeScript, you have to define what what the object or prompt is, like type wise, whether it's a number, Boolean, if it's a type with a bunch of other objects in it with different types in it, you have to define that. If you don't, it's going to cause a lot of confusion in your app, and you might, depending on what kind of validation checks that you have in your application. Some people would have like, well, you're using ESLint, for example. You could define, okay, well, if I don't have my types for the props that I'm passing down, that it should error out in the browser, and you have to fix it. So this is why I have a type here in the status word that we're only passing in, which is the status, which is a state. It should be a number. And to define that, this is very nitpicky too, but you should also make this a number type, because this should only be a number. It shouldn't be a string or anything like that. All right. So this keeps you honest. So this will be a number because we parse into it, and this will be a string. We convert it into a number, and now we can pass that into our prop. Say, for example, if I didn't have this parse int in here, right? Then I'm just like, I'm just going to pass it in as this, and this should be fine. So it's just going to be that. Now we look at this. Argument of type string is not accessible because this is a number, and the default value is a number. Okay. So this keeps you honest. That's why I love using TypeScript, because it tells the developer, hey, you got the wrong type. And maybe if you want to convert the type to a string, you could do that easily. But if I go here, you can see that, okay, so I have this, right? And we're going to just create a function that makes this a lot easier. So the best way to go about this is using a switch case statement. So you can see AI already has that going for me. And depending on the case, you get all these different statuses. And mind you, instead of typing all this out, AI helps. This is golden. This is why I tell you guys, just use AI, bro. It saves a lot of time. So here we already got an issue. So pending, right? Should not be this. It should be a 4. And it should return that. And then after case 5 should be in review. So now we have this case statement here. Okay. And label text. And then here we would just do const label. And now all we would need to do is pass in this function. This gets rid of this. And if I was to go back to our app, everything functions as it should. Okay. So you could do it this way. You could also do if else statements if you want. It depends on what you want to do. It's personal preference. I think this is much cleaner. Now, in this case, with the color too, now you're separating this too. You could do this example. Oh yeah, you see how it's just, and this is why TypeScript is great. So the reason why we're getting this error is because without you defining a type, is going to assume that it's the any type, and any means that is anything. It could be a string. Say, for example, if I put any in here, that means that I could pass in a string, I could pass in a Boolean, I could pass in a number. You don't want that because we're looking for a number. You're going to break your application by doing this. So to keep you honest, we know that the status is going to be a number. You pull that in here. That's it. So we're good here. Now we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to create a badge color function, and this is going to do the same thing. And I'm going to show you guys why the way we're doing it here. I'm gonna be real honest with you. The way we're doing it in this particular example, I'm not really a fan of, at least with this, and I'll show you why. So I'm just going to do some boilerplating here. I'm going to make sure that suspended has the right color. So see in this, okay, there's another bug here too. And I'm going to show you guys what it is. So like I said, with the magic numbers, and I was doing this on purpose, but now we ran into an issue where it was case 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Like based on our enum type, we would know, and like this does it perfectly, but here we're not doing it. So what we need to do is add our types. So now we know exactly what it is. We do this, and we're gonna do the same thing here. So don't forget, once you're doing your refactoring, make sure that you pull in those enum types, okay? So now we have the label text, and then we also have the badge color. This is fine. So if I come here, do badge color status, now I get rid of this, and everything is defined in its own separate function. Okay, cool. So, but now so if I go back to the app, now we got an issue. So the colors that were already defined here have changed, and it was because of the autocomplete. So I'm gonna go back and refactor that. We should be good here. And now when I go back to my app, you should see that everything is back to normal. This is what we want. This is exactly what we want. Now, if I go back to the code, this is cool. This is fine, right? It keeps everything honest, but I like simplicity. I like simplicity. So in this case, we want to make sure that, and also want to just, so this is a title for that actual badge, and we could see if you could log in with this or not, whether this is true or false. So based on the status, we are going to do this. And then the status of 2 is suspended, right? Boom. So we should be good in this case. So now our app is cleaned up, right? It's cleaner. We understand what these types are, what these statuses are based on the enum types. The problem now is that I don't like the way this is. I don't like it. And the reason for that is because you could simplify these case statements into like an actual object. So instead of calling this label text, I could call this status badge type, right? Keep it simple. It takes in the status, which is the number. If it's active, I actually want to return the label and the color, right? So easily, how would I do that? Return object, create an object here. So you see how the AI already does it for me. Boom. And let's apply that to everything else. So now I got the color, I got the object that I'm returning, right? You don't really need these comments here. AI just does it just so that just to keep you honest. But honestly, you don't really need to go crazy with this. And then we're missing a curly brace here. Space this out so it's consistent. And then here we're gonna have that. So this has everything here, right? So now I don't have to have, for example, we're just gonna pull in this, and I'm gonna call this badge equals to this. And all I have to do now is do badge.color and also badge.label. See how simple that was? So we took these two functions and we combined them into one. This is why understanding how to write code in a fundamental way and thinking outside the box to where you can simplify the amount of code that you're writing is very important. If you don't do this, you will run into something like this to where now you have all these different functions that do different things, and you could probably combine all that stuff into one and actually make some progress. So in this case, this goes away and this goes away. So now look how simplified our code is. Look how simplified it is. Very simple. We cut down on analyzing the code just by doing this. And I want to implore you guys to do this if you're doing templating, like with this example, to where everything still functions, right? Still works. If you want a template, do it that way. Make sure that the code actually looks good. because this is important to where you could write, like, based on what we did, we refactored in steps. We created an enum type to solve the problem with magic numbers. We then created that function to define exactly what those statuses are with the switch case. And then you see the comparison between the two functions. You could just combine them into one and build out a nice, a nice system. And you could add as much data as you want to this and make it easier for yourself. And your future self will love that you did this. Okay. So in this example, I just wanted to show you guys what magic numbers are. They're very important. They're very important to take care of in your code base. You will run into complexity if you don't do this, all right? So if you guys have any questions on this project, please let me know. It was this very helpful doing something like this to where it's completely different from my other videos. I would love to expand this project into like an actual like login situation to where a user will try to log in based on the account status, whether it's active or suspended. You would get either access to the system or you won't. There will be a confirmation message or an error message that says your account has been suspended, contact support or contact billing and all that stuff. There's a lot of different ways you could build an application, but you have to think about it in a certain way that a user would use that application. So in this case, when you're building something like this, it's good to do something in steps. If you don't really have the mindset to do what we just did, it's not a big deal. But you have to start to understand what the similarities are and try to combine things if you can. Don't repeat yourself. Keep it dry. All right. So let me know if you like this video. Like, share, subscribe if you do. If you want more coding examples like this, let me know. And I'll create a video series out of it. All right. We'll talk soon, bro.